This is how you keep your pool fresh. Brandon, the client, hurled beer at me. His personality was the worst. I've had enough of the people from his company throwing beer at me. How much more bother must he give us before he's satisfied? Our organization experienced a difficult period as a result of Brandon, and the staff members he deceived were also facing difficulties. I was always so angry thinking about Brandon, how self-centered. I made the decision to avenge him. Then the deal for $200 million is off, effective immediately. I held my phone up to make sure he could clearly hear the playback because he appeared perplexed. After hearing the recorded words, Brandon's demeanor completely altered, and he began to apologize. That being said, I ignored him. Whatever he said, I was not going to forgive Brandon. Alex Johnson is my name, and this year I will be 32. I am the CEO of a firm that manufactures high-end watches. My business has expanded quickly since we had great success with our own line of timepieces. I'm happy with my employment, even though it's a difficult profession that also pays well. My interest in this work stems from an event that happened in my early years. My grandfather was a really special man, and one day his big old clock broke. Since he was a young boy, my grandfather has held the clock in high regard. He attempted to restore it by taking it to a few different repair shops, but sadly, his efforts were unsuccessful. It was too old, and in the end, nobody could fix the clock. I wanted to fix the broken clock after seeing my grandfather's dejected expression. I'll become someone who can fix any clock when I grow up. Is that accurate? You're sweet, Alex, but I'm not in any danger. Follow your own aspirations. After a few years, I found myself employed in the watch business, but I was never able to fix that old clock, so it now peacefully rests in a corner of my home. One of my greatest regrets is that I was unable to show my grandfather the working clock once more after he passed away when I was 20 years old. It was not quite noon. I was heading to the reception area, having just left the CEO's office. Along the way, I noticed worn-out workers from various departments conversing in the hallway. Scenes like these were becoming routine for the organization. Employees from different departments wouldn't normally interact much, but because of the staffing shortage, this was now a common occurrence. All of this occurred as a result of the termination of one employee, Brandon, a few months prior, for deceiving multiple coworkers and forcing them to resign. An attractive man in his 50s, Brandon constantly showed off his wealth with elaborate watches and ties. His attitude at work was much worse than that of other employees, which resulted in his termination. But after he was sacked, Brandon assured some of our brightest workers that he would give them greater chances at other businesses. Consequently, a number of workers accepted his word for it and departed the organization. Due to the significant staff shortage that resulted, several employees were forced to take on extra responsibilities from other departments. After a long trek, I sighed when I reached the reception area. It appears that the client I was meant to meet with at this time has not yet shown up. I spoke with a male employee who had made coffee in the room while making sure there were no outside guests. It seems our client hasn't arrived yet, Jess. They called a short while ago to say they'd be about 5 minutes late, so it might take a bit longer. Even as the president of this company, I cannot afford to take it easy because we are now experiencing a staff shortage. I'm performing the tasks that the sales department would typically complete because of this. However, I'm starting to get tired of it, presumably from being so busy lately covering for others at the production plant, assisting with marketing and public relations, and so forth. Leave me to relax on the sofa. I'm a little tired. Kindly ignore me and carry on with your task. Oh yes, understood. Exhaustion overcame me as I settled into the reception room sofa and closed my eyes. I closed my eyes and thought back to several things that had happened recently. The firm wouldn't be in this predicament if it weren't for Brandon. As it happens, the workers who left after being persuaded by Brandon's claims were unable to obtain jobs at the purportedly better firm. The people who were tricked were unable to rejoin our organization and appear to be having difficulty finding new employment. Despite my sympathy for their predicament and the fact that it's their decision to leave their place of employment, I was unable to simply offer assistance given the company's reputation. I therefore intend to hire a diverse spectrum of people while I am seeking out new talent. This calls for further planning and probably busier days in the future. The man who had been in the reception area shouted out to me while I was thinking about the future. While I was sleeping, he appeared to have been talking on the phone with someone. It appears that the client has just arrived, President Johnson. I've arranged all of the deal's paperwork on the table. Comprehensive. I appreciate you getting things ready. We're really busy, so it can be difficult, but persevere until we can bring on some more employees. Yes. A few minutes later, the client showed up in the room after the employee was sent off with a perceptive response. I got up from the couch to say hello, but something stopped me. I was not anticipating the man who walked in, despite his flashy attire. The man with the gold tie was showing off a high-end watch that he was wearing. In addition, his wallet, which was visible through his open briefcase, was obviously a fancy brand, and his tie included an unusually huge gemstone. Even though his appearance and belongings were shocking, they didn't really matter. The fact that the man was Brandon, who had left the organization a few months prior, shocked me the most. I was somewhat perplexed by this unexpected turn of events, but as the CEO of a corporation, I couldn't afford to ponder. I inhaled deeply to center myself before looking back at Brandon. Brandon, why are you here? It's apparent, isn't it? Now that I'm in command of this arrangement, is that something you can comprehend? Well, perhaps your intellect is too slow to keep up because you can't even afford a good lunch because you're poor. I wanted to run away from reality after hearing his impolite introductory words, but I put up with it for the benefit of the group. Maybe this would be easy for someone who eats steak every day because of his wife's money, but it was a little difficult for us common people to understand. Is that meant to be ironic? Poverty, it seems, makes even the sting of defeat seem insignificant with a sneer. He has been looking down on me and calling me poor, maybe since I showed up when I fired Brandon with a raggedy towel. Putting that aside, I needed something to wipe off my perspiration that day because the air conditioning wasn't working properly. It was simply something I carried with me to get through the intense heat until the repair service could come. However, I never imagined that would be enough to earn me the title of poor. He must have thought that I was really impoverished and could not even afford to eat tomorrow. Brandon appears to think of himself as wealthy, unlike me. Using his wife's earnings, he indulges in luxury, purchasing new cars and having steak for breakfast. It appears that he used to brag to his coworkers about these kinds of activities. Even though it's his wife's money, he doesn't appear to be ashamed to boast about it. Thus, in a low voice that Brandon didn't appear to hear, I said, "It's not like you earned it yourself." "What was that? Have you made any comments?" "No, it's nothing." Taking a casual step inside the reception area, Brandon settled down on the couch. He leaned back, crossed his legs, and signaled to me to take a seat. I retreated to the sofa because I was exhausted. I couldn't just stand there the entire time, but I also couldn't have a peaceful conversation with Brandon. "A long time has passed. I've been missing your face for months," he murmured. To keep from getting angry, I had to approach this like I would have a nonverbal child, with patience, not like I was interacting with another person. "Are you doing sales work at your new company, just like you did here?" I inquired. "Yes, I'm enforcing discipline there in my capacity as a manager. I've been able to work more freely because there aren't any rule sticklers here." There was no hint of regret or repentance in his statements. I'm sure he's still behaving selfishly at his new job. This gave me confidence that firing him was the right move. Had someone such as Brandon stayed on staff, it would have contaminated the organization and impacted other employees as well. Yes, it was a wiser decision to fire him sooner rather than later. But I never would have guessed that he would lie to other workers and hurt the firm so badly. In addition, What about the other people that departed at roughly the same time as me? Have they returned to your business?" he asked, sounding a little innocent. I shook my head, forcing the ache I was feeling to subside. Obviously not. It's not as easy as firing someone and then hiring them again. "That's right," he said with a sly laugh and a supposedly amused hand clap. I had absolutely no idea how Brandon was feeling. I opted to move on to the main topic after asking what I wanted to know and not wanting to go into any more personal conversation that might distress me. Let's switch gears then and move on to the discussion about our deal. We then carried on with the business talk after that. He commented, "You look pretty tired," as we were coming to an end of our talk. He was looking at me closely. I am aware of the shortage of employees. It has to be difficult. Seeing the CEO of my old company in this state makes me sad. He smiled mockingly as he departed the reception area, despite his statements. I beat my fist against the table in front of me out of frustration. Brandon most likely came to see how the business was doing. To come here, he must have had someone else trade places with him. I felt nauseated at the idea of his malice in combining personal grudges with business. I got back to my flat around midnight after work and went straight to the antique clock in the corner. I took some items from my family's house, where I used to live before moving out on my own, to make me feel less homesick. It comforts and reassures me just to gaze at and touch these cherished childhood pieces of furniture. Upon closer examination, I saw stickers from candy wrappers put on them and lines marked with a marker representing my development spurts. Observing these remnants of my former existence brings back memories of my parents, who observed my development, and my mother, who would always buy me candies on her way home from the store. Once I had indulged in a little nostalgia, I looked at my grandfather's old clock. With the exception of the antique clock, which is the only piece of non-functional furniture I've brought, the clothing and table are all in working order. It no longer serves as a timepiece and is now just there in the room's corner. I attempt a lot of different ways to fix it when I have time to spare, but it stays still. When I touch the ancient clock, my grandfather's boyhood memories rush back to me. I can think back on my life and how I've lived it when I look at this clock and consider time. Actually, in what way? Whether I've lived a life I'm proud of, if I've made worthwhile use of my time, and so on. The best thing about clocks, in my opinion, is that they allow you to take stock of who you are. My grandfather had a soft way of gazing at the clock, and I adored him for it. These recollections gave me hope, and I was inspired to tackle tomorrow with newfound vigor. I heard my cell phone's ringtone while I was getting ready. It was an email sent by a company employee. The year-end party of the corporation was referenced in the content. The location appeared to have changed somewhat from the previous year. It appears that Brandon's workplace is close to the new location. I instantly replied to the email after shaking my mind to get rid of any bad ideas. It appears that I had gotten another email from someone in the sales department during that period. Upon perusing the contents, I couldn't suppress a shocked outburst. What a scandal this is. The email described a scandal involving a business that we had thought to be a trustworthy partner. In situations like this, my firm's course of action is obvious. Cooperating with a company that is involved in a controversy should obviously end right away, as it could endanger us. Still, I had a hard time believing that such an act had happened. I gave someone from the relevant company a call. This company was a major commercial partner of ours. It was a retailer of luxury watches. It was a business that had never previously produced any significant problems. Emily, I think, was in command. Emily, a lady in her 50s who was renowned for her honesty and earnestness, was in charge of our commercial transaction. I have had a few encounters with her as well, since I have been filling in for the sales department. One day, when Emily was working in our reception area, a worker who was making coffee passed out. I was unable to move right away due to the numbness in my leg, but Emily graciously offered to handle things in my place. I therefore found it difficult to accept that a business employing someone like her could be connected to a controversy. She said that a new hire had embezzled corporate monies and given them to a shadowy organization. Although they have a strict hiring procedure normally, this person was employed by a temporary employee, which gave the company access to someone with a questionable background. I couldn't hold it against my firm because we're going through a similar problem with replacements right now. Emily and I then had a lengthy conversation before hanging up. It's amusing in retrospect that this episode would eventually lead to revenge against Brandon, demonstrating the capricious nature of fate. It was already several weeks later. It was now the day of the year-end celebration, and I was seated at a corner table inside a bar. I had just completed looking over the list of attendees. It had been an hour since the beginning, and the staff, now intoxicated, were having a good time. A few had departed early because they had other commitments or were feeling under the weather, so the total was slightly smaller at first. I was concerned because I remembered a worker who had passed out in front of the bar the previous year from heavy drinking. Though thankfully there were no significant problems or thefts, it was nonetheless a scary moment. It could be a good idea to look about to make sure nothing similar happened. I said to a secretary nearby that I was going outside. Then I got a towel fast from the secretary. It's a little uncomfortable, but that's because there's a potential that an employee who passed out on the street could throw up after being lifted up. Handling that kind of issue was problematic the previous year. But somewhere along the line, the towel became a little dirty, possibly from touching something. The secretary saw this and offered to bring another, but I turned her offer down. It's just a tiny spot on the corner, nothing to worry about. This towel should be plenty for someone who can't control their alcohol intake to the point of passing out on the street. I'd discipline any employees seen acting in such a way, but I wouldn't go so far as to fire them for it. In the cool night air, I thought back on the previous few weeks as I walked out of the pub while the secretary observed. The environment in the company was beginning to stabilize as the new staff settled in. There was less of a likelihood for significant problems to occur because there was no need to multitask between departments. At the year-end celebration, I was taking advantage of the unique chance to relax when I ran into someone I didn't want to see. The individual I had reconnected with in the reception area weeks prior stood in front of me. "Hey Alex, what are you doing here?" Brandon had come out of one of the local bars. Maybe his employer was hosting a year-end celebration as well. I wanted to shake my head in dissatisfaction at this coincidence. It appeared like he wouldn't let me ignore him and walk past. Talking about which, this is when your company does its year-end celebration, right? We follow suit. Is that accurate? Then why don't you go back inside? Stop acting that way. I just witnessed one of your workers collapse next to a neighboring fence. His remarks drew my attention, but I really wanted to cut the conversation short and walk away. Is that really true? Obviously. Will you not search for them? I looked at Brandon's smug, booze-stained face. I couldn't ignore it, even though it sounded completely suspicious. All right, thanks for letting me know. No issue. After all, we were employed by the same business once. I chose to search the neighborhood, reminding myself that I was doing this to protect my staff. I spent 10 minutes or so looking around carefully, and I could not find anyone who looked like our crew. Though I hoped the drunk employee had sobered sufficiently to return home, I was worried that they might have been engaged in an incident. Though I was reluctant to pry into their personal lives, I thought about giving those who had already departed a call to see how they were doing. That was when Brandon came over to me once again while carrying a beer mug. He stumbled over to face me, clearly drunker than before. I was back in front of the pub where Brandon had been before I realized it. Stumbling over to me, Brandon pointed and laughed. Oh, you really gave it some thought. That was clearly untrue. It seems that I had been tricked. A wave of rage was causing my fists to shake. Stop making jokes. I'm now really upset. Aren't you already furious? Fits you perfectly. Why do you have a soiled towel in your hand? Did you not find anything more tittier? You must be very poor. Huh. Regardless of my level of rage, I knew better than to use force. I was attempting to control my fury as I looked down as something cold flowed over my head. The beer that Brandon had been holding minutes earlier was the golden liquid. That's right, Brandon scoffed. Then Brandon pulled me into a tavern in the area. I got dragged so hard and collapsed into the pub. Glancing up, I observed that the place was crowded with middle-aged guys wearing suits, creating a loud commotion that flushed their faces. Brandon struck up a conversation with them. Come on over here, have some drink. This guy has too much conceit. Even worse, he dared to terminate me from my previous position. These were probably employees of the company that Brandon worked for. The men inside the tavern began to swarm around, grinning, in response to Brandon's call. They turned their beer mugs over in their hands, spilling the contents all over me at once. I got up, beer dampened, one after the other, feeling sorry for the confused bar owner. It was unlikely that Brandon and his gang would bother to mop up the mess on the floor. I apologized to the owner of the tavern and turned away from Brandon and his company, not even looking at them again. If I continued to witness their shameful actions, I might lose the will to resist hitting them. Brandon sneered, "This is to freshen up your poor-looking self." But I finally lost it shortly before I left the pub when I heard a mocking voice. I turned to say one more thing to Brandon. Then the deal for $200 million is off, effective immediately. What? I made the decision to drive Brandon to the brink of despair since it appeared like he was asking for his own demise. Standing there with his beer mug empty, Brandon swore foolishly at his own incapacity to realize how serious things were. I explained what I said in detail. The agreement is nullified. What topic are you discussing? My business and yours don't have a similar agreement. Is that accurate? How is your wife's business doing? No way. I had verified that the email from the year-end celebration was really from Brandon's wife a few weeks prior. I had heard about the scandal started by one of Emily's workers during that call. So as to save us any hassle, she begged me to get out of the $200 million business transaction. She gave the impression of being a real and decent person, despite her husband's actions. Benefits must always be taken into account in business, yet since humans are involved, emotions cannot be totally detached. I was conflicted about the circumstance and thought it would be unfortunate to break off our relationship. That's what I told Emily over the phone. Since you weren't the one who caused the scandal, once the commotion settles down, we'll look for the right time to resume our business deal. Even though I had to uphold the honor of my firm and sever relations right away, I made a commitment to pick up where we left off. However, the individual in front of me had never heard of such a discussion. I put an end to my memory and, speaking quietly, invited Emily there to explain the current circumstances. I also asked her to tell her spouse the truth about the circumstances. I aimed my phone speaker at Brandon. Pal, Johnson is correct as president. My company won't be able to deal with anyone for a while, so I was going to tell you later. It appears that we will be experiencing hardship for a while. I apologize. Brandon was stunned for a few seconds after hearing this, and then his face became pale. No, it's not possible. I take it you're kidding. Are you not attempting to mislead me? How could I make a joke about this kind of thing? Is this actually happening? When Brandon realized how serious things were, he shook and went to his knees, crying out to me over and over. I beg you not to end the business relationship with my wife's company. We'll be unable to survive. He begged, but none of what he said struck a chord with me. This was no laughing matter. Please, we used to work at the same company, remember? He just cared about himself and didn't even try to apologize for what he had done to my firm. There was no way to assist someone in that way. Without saying anything he would like to hear, I added, I might catch a cold, so I'll be heading back, and I turned to leave the area. When I arrived back at the year-end celebration location, my staff gave me startled looks. They questioned, "President Johnson, what happened to you?" The staff peered confusedly out the window, wondering if it had rained. A secretary who chanced to walk by would have recognized what had transpired by the smell of beer among them. She brought me another towel and then began to make cab arrangements for me. I felt sticky even after I changed in the bathroom after having someone buy me fresh clothes. I had no choice but to return home early in such a situation. Brandon approached me gasping for air as I stood outside waiting for the cab. "I'm glad you're still with us. Please don't cancel the business with my wife's company, President Johnson. I'm sorry if I poured beer all over you." In front of me, Brandon apologized once more. I had already made up my mind despite his attempts. Did he think my feelings would alter if I made an earnest plea? Brandon continued to say the same thing without looking directly at me. When my staff heard his voice, they went outside. "What brings Brandon here? You also brought up beer before. Would you not deny that you were the one who splattered President Johnson with it?" With contempt, they gazed at Brandon. This could cause havoc at the year-end celebration. I tried to go back inside so as not to disturb the happy employees, but Brandon grabbed my clothes from behind. "Please stay with me. Do you intend to leave me behind?" He was reprimanded by the staff as I considered my next move. "It's time to stop. How much difficulties have you caused our company with your actions?" "You're correct. Please stop causing us more problems. Even your face was too much for us to see again. Just vanish from our view right now." Brandon shuddered every time he was subjected to the verbal assault from the staff members, who were surprised to hear such things. He looked as though he was going to say something, but all he did was tremble his lips. His shoulders finally fell, as if accepting his fate, and he staggered off. I was overcome with fatigue as soon as he was out of sight. It did not seem likely that he would appear before us again, given his condition. I grabbed a taxi home after that. It seems the year-end celebration went on without any more problems, maybe because of my parting remarks encouraging everyone to enjoy the remainder of the celebration on my behalf. After receiving pictures from my secretary showing the staff having fun, I looked at the pictures and felt relieved. I was dragging my wearied body into the bath when my cell phone's incoming email notification went off. Once more, it was a message telling me that Brandon was back at Emily's house. Postponing my bath, I gave Emily a ring. "Hello. Do you have a moment?" My spouse just arrived home and gave me a rundown of everything. "It appears that he treated you and your companions rather badly." She seemed eager to take responsibility for her husband's behavior. The bad vibes I'd been feeling before started to fade as I imagined her honest face. "It's all right. It doesn't really concern me. However, I apologize if he interfered with your fun year-end celebration. Everyone still seemed to be enjoying themselves. I appreciate your concern." I was not going to hold Emily responsible. "I guess our company is completely disliked by yours now." "Not at all. My colleagues and I are aware that you are not at fault. Don't say anything like that, please." "I'm grateful. It eases my discomfort, even if it is only a white lie." It wasn't a lie, I reasoned, knowing that she might not accept it. She apologized so deeply that I was unable to think negatively of her. "By the way, I've been curious about something." I tried to change the subject by asking her a question I had been wondering about for a while, because I thought it would be unfair to force her to apologize any more. I asked why the conceited Brandon and the egotistical Emily, with their diametrically opposed dispositions, became a married couple. I questioned the decision of two people with radically different personalities to get married. "Well, that actually," Emily stumbledly admitted, "we didn't decide on the marriage ourselves. It was decided by our parents. Without taking into account their personal wishes, their marriage was arranged. Because their parents were good friends and believed that their kids would get along, they planned the marriage against Emily and Brandon's wishes." I was shocked by her narrative and thought, those are terrible parents. but it did explain how someone as self-centered as Brandon could exist. Emily looked set on getting a divorce from him. On the phone, her voice sounded relieved. I intend to start anew and restructure the business after my divorce. Could I please get in touch with you when we're able to conduct business again? Indeed, without a doubt. I'm excited for the day when we can collaborate with your business once more. She may have a lot of obstacles ahead of her, but I have no doubt that she will succeed. Regardless of how formidable the challenges, she possesses the strength to conquer them. After the divorce, Emily appeared to have severed her relationship with Brandon. It is said that he moved into her old flat, but his problems didn't stop there. An executive from the organization had witnessed the incident that night, which made Brandon feel uncomfortable at work. Through word of mouth, I find out that the other workers who poured me a bunch of booze are feeling the same way. Some received punishment or a demote. Brandon was downgraded to a regular employee position. He eventually had enough of the toxic workplace and left from the company, withdrawing into his flat. We've been having busier days as the business has grown, but everything is going according to plan. Our goods are selling well, and the recent hires are all dedicated workers who make major contributions. It's always a good vibe in the office when there's no troublemaker like Brandon. We were able to start doing business with Emily's company again after a year, by which time the scandal had healed Emily's company. I was excited to see her face again at the sales department business meeting. A long time has passed. I've returned to conduct business with your organization, as I previously stated. I expressed my gratitude that you were able to recuperate. We eventually started talking more and became friends as a result of that reconnection, which was a good thing. I discovered that as the workforce grew, I had more spare time. I used this chance to hone my clock repairing abilities and was eventually able to fix my grandfather's clock. I finally fixed the ancient clock, however, it took several days and was a difficult task. I talked to the clock, thinking of my late grandfather, filled with a sense of success. Grandpa, I've finally got the clock to function again. Do you think you're keeping an eye on me from heaven? I'm hoping you can hear this clock's sound there. For the first time in decades, the sound of the clock ticking away seemed auspicious for the days ahead.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn, Alright, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was. As the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here." "He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.